So, continuing RE0 Season 3, like I said last week, there is so much in these earlier episodes that I couldn't hope to cover it all without crowding everything else out, and now there is the additional 5th new episode to grapple with as well. So we'll be addressing some of the other things I wanted to touch on in the 3rd season so far, but be sure you check out the first part in last week's Casual Monday, and then next week I hope to finish covering everything else from the earlier episodes as we add Episode 6 into the mix. Now then, the 5th episode is bookended by scenes featuring Amelia and the new situation she finds herself in thanks to Regulus's decision to add her to his collection of wives. I spent some time last week talking about the possibility and possible implications of a damsel in distress scenario. I held off on talking about Regulus then, so we will do so this week, but I first want to comment on Amelia's own behavior in these 2 scenes, and the surprisingly far-reaching questions that I find spring from it. This is going to seem like an amazingly long tangent, I realize, but I promise it's leading to something important. And also, welcome to my brand of content. Anyway, Amelia is incredibly unworldly, something she herself knows, and we even wondered before the stream if she would know how to answer Regulus's gross question about her virginity. After all, she thought kissing Subaru meant she was pregnant back in Season 2. While that emphasizes that she did not take the kiss lightly, it illustrates how woefully sheltered she is. Even if Amelia has educated herself on where babies come from in the years since, the concept of virginity is a cultural rather than biological matter. What I mean is that the existence of this term, of giving some kind of weight or sacred status to being a virgin, and especially a virgin bride, carries with it a worldview and value system that she would not understand in isolation. In fact, I think it's worth pointing out we have no idea what the citizens of Lagunica think about the concept of virginity, or even if they would be monolithic in their opinion. We know marriage is a thing, and we know we have nobles and family names and a focus on the importance of lineage. In such an environment, we might surmise that, at least among the highborn, virginity would be valued in women, if only for the purpose of ensuring parentage. There's never any question who the mother of a child is, but presuming that we don't have magical genetic testing, the same cannot be said of the child's father. In societies structured about patrilineal descent, then, the only insurance against an illegitimate heir is to restrict the possible fathers down to 1. We might find aspects of this outdated or even quaint, but go far enough back, and you'll discover cultures who believed, quite literally, that the world's continued existence depended upon passing a ruler's essence to their children. Among nobles in feudal societies, lineage was important for alliances and inheritance of titles and land, one of the networks of things binding a society together on a macro level. And so, too, it is not unsurprising to find emphasis on virgin brides in such a setting. These are not the only reasons a culture would make a fuss about virginity, to be sure, but they seem like the most relevant. However, I have a few reasons that make me stop short of making the same assumptions about the world this series is set in. For starters, I don't think we have any reason to assume patrilineal descent in the first place. The contenders for royal selection are all women, and evidently not even all single women, since we find out Priscilla had a husband. Otto informs us that his husband's death resulted in her inheriting his territory, and while it's possible that he had literally no other relatives, at the very least it means women are not forbidden from inheriting. To me, it implies that the winning candidate is not meant simply to be the bride for some future actual ruler, otherwise her former husband would probably be the one under scrutiny. We also have the example of Kruj. Now, while we haven't been given full details, she is introduced as the head of the Karsten family during the royal selection, and is sometimes referred to as Duchess, a title she must possess inherently rather than granted by marriage to a duke. Likewise, there is Anne Rose, who we met for just a brief moment at the end of Season 2, where we are informed that she is the leader of the Miloda family, a branch of Roswaal's own lineage. Possibly even more revealing is the example of Wilhelm and Theresia. Felix calls him Wilhelm van Austria the Sword Demon in the episode we meet him, and later when he introduces himself to Subaru formally, he explains that he took Theresia van Austria, the former Master Swordsman, as wife, giving him the honor of the lowest seat in the bloodline. Once we get to see his memories, it's confirmed that she was Theresia van Austria all along, and Wilhelm is the one who took on her family name. Indeed, when he introduces himself to Amelia at the end of Season 1, he actually calls himself Wilhelm Trias, and I am guessing that this might be what he was named originally. Season 3 has added yet more to this situation, though we are missing a few details. When we meet Heinkel, we learn that he is the one who inherited the Austria estate, and seems to have no intent of passing it to Reinhard, a point of contention that is still unresolved. But that means that the estate is not in Wilhelm's possession. This may mean that estates follow bloodlines rather than marriages, although Priscilla's example would seem to be in contradiction. It may also mean that Wilhelm essentially abdicated after the events of 15 years ago, leaving the Austria family or the royal guard or both. He is, after all, serving Kruge and her household. Curiously, too, Heinkel makes a point that he is not Heinkel von Austria, just Austria, that he was not granted that title. In our world, von is just an article designating a place of origin or an ancestral homeland, and at first blush, it seems to be treated differently here, but I'll come back to that point in just a moment. Wilhelm's example, in fact, may mean that descent is matrilineal, and men only hold power in the absence of a suitable woman heir. After all, Fortuna appeared to be the head of the elven village where Emilia grew up, and the chief of Arlon village down the road from Roz's mansion is this woman, adding to the examples of Kruge and Anna Rose. And it may even be that there is no preferential treatment one way or another, especially in light of one thing we do know about this world: the concept of covenants. I made a joke about magical genetic testing, but something in that ballpark seems to exist. At the end of Season 2, Betty informs us about the 3 kinds of agreements, and the one we're interested in is the covenant, which applies to all blood relatives. In fact, this is the kind of contract that the Lugunica royal family held with the dragon, and rekindling said covenant is the stated purpose of this whole royal selection affair. In such a case, it should barely matter how much care is taken to ensure legitimate heirs, as being bound by the agreement should speak to one's authenticity as part of the bloodline. Coming back to the Austrias then, I find myself wondering if the whole Master Swordsman title is a similar kind of thing. Reinhard appears to be Teresia's heir in the sense of inheriting the name of Master Swordsman, but it seems like it goes way beyond a mere designation. Reinhard is a kind of anomaly, having some kind of immunity or negation towards authorities, and having a power that forces all the mana in an area to wildly obey him. That doesn't seem like the result of training, but some kind of ancestral power passed down the line. And it seems a fair bet that it can skip a generation, considering Heikel's example. This, perhaps, is why he is not von Austria. I mentioned it usually designates a homeland, but more broadly, can specify a bloodline's point of origin. Perhaps then it's a variation on that idea. Rather than Austria as a name meaning a place, maybe it means this Master Swordsman power, and specifies a person or covenant or something in that direction, or at least a standard in the past that one must live up to. So, if any of that at all is near the mark, then there may be no gender preference when it comes to matters of political power or inheritance. In that absence, any emphasis on the importance of virginity is more likely to arise from cultural or religious traditions. To this point, we haven't been given any suggestion of religion among the population as a whole, with the witches' cult and its archbishops the only example, and they may only be borrowing the paraphernalia of religious orders. That leaves culture, but here we're at a loss as well. Honestly, the very notion of virginity and its explicit adjacency to sexuality is a new ground for the series, which has largely been very tame and hands-off regarding such matters. We get oblique jokes at best, like Emilia's confusion over pregnancy, or Subaru and Roz in the bath. While there are plenty of examples of characters being interested in others, the portrayals are more of the liking or loving variety rather than displays of desire. What romance exists in RE0 is very chaste. In fact, I might as well point out another curious trend in the series, which is the almost complete absence of characters as couples. When we talked about Season 1 way back, one of the things that came up was Subaru and Emilia's inexperience with anything like a relationship, which led to realizing that they didn't have any examples around to emulate either. In fact, in all of Season 1, the only confirmed couple where both have speaking lines is the Appa vendor and his wife. Even Teresia and Wilhelm only have lines in his memories. She certainly isn't around for Subaru or Emilia to meet, and Wilhelm seems to be a different person in the present than when they were a couple. Rem has memories of her own parents, but that is an even more distant example. If you extend this to Season 2, you still have almost nothing. Subaru has memories of his parents, who do not even exist in this world, and Oto's memories of his parents and a pair of cats are all that you could add otherwise. Fortuna and Juice are clearly friendly in Amelia's memories, but circumstances seemed to make anything else impossible even before she died. Otherwise, you have a whole truckload of one-sided crushes or simply no information at all. Arguably one of the most shocking things introduced in Season 3 is Garf's mom, Rishia, and her husband. If I'm not mistaken, they are the only current couple in the series where we know at least one name, if you leave aside Subaru and Amelia. When you consider the size and diversity of the cast, and especially how many are in the prime dating years of mid-teens to mid-20s, it's actually kind of wild to have such a dearth of romantic scenarios. Small wonder there has been no occasion to learn how this world's denizens weigh in on subjects like virginity. Which then brings me back to where we started, with Amelia trying to parse Regulus's question. Like I said, it's not surprising that she doesn't understand, considering her almost ingenue-like characterization and the lack of examples around her. That's not the important part, but I'll come back to the important part. I first want to point out that Amelia's seeming passivity in the scene arises from her confusion and her naivete. Because she doesn't know what virginity means, or what is implied by being asked, she doesn't know to be on guard. She doesn't remember Regulus capturing her, just the fight with Sirius. For all she knows, at first, he might be a benevolent savior. He rather pointedly does not mention that he's a Sin Archbishop when he introduces himself this time. His talk of them being husband and wife confuses her, but without knowing what we do, she is understandably more perplexed than alarmed. She's always so polite that I can even imagine she's trying to figure out how to question his words without causing conflict. Because Amelia is such an innocent, too, her absent clothing is somewhat pacifying, as she feels vulnerable and distracted on top of her bewilderment. I bring all that up because I had previously mentioned my worry over a possible damsel in distress situation. Amelia's behavior at first seems to suggest that she will play the meek victim, but when trying to reconstruct the situation from her perspective, I find that far less likely. After all, she makes the statement to 184 that he is like an evil king in a book, so she is not assuming his benevolence by the end of the scene. When we return to her after the end credits, too, she will be worried about the destruction that she sees in the city below. When 184 says that Regulus will not like that expression on her face, Amelia is incredulous, worried about the city and not whatever he wants. Thus, I don't think Amelia will be compliant or helplessly passive, at least for her own sake. The presence of 184 and Amelia's tendency to try to look after others might be a bigger hurdle to reasserting her freedom. I'm not sure Regulus even realizes Amelia's capability as a combatant, but she certainly knows nothing of his power, unless she can recall memories of the trial. However it shakes out, though, I feel less apprehensive now about the story just playing that trope straight. Now, with that out of the way, let's get back to the important part. Regulus inquiring after Amelia's sexual experience is a really dissonant note in the story to this point, considering all we just discussed about the almost conspicuous absence of sex or romance in the series. So dissonant, in fact, that we should consider it significant purely because of how it stands out. I want to talk about two of the possibilities that occur to me right away. The first is more obvious, which is that this is a means of characterizing Regulus. I ran through the examples of gender and roles and nobility earlier, and what we find is actually a lack of evidence for any kind of gender preference in Lagunica's power structures, and we might presume that this extends to civil liberties as well. There is one glaring exception, but we'll get back to that later. The salient point is that Regulus's behavior in unilaterally choosing women to be his bride, disregarding their input on the matter, and keeping what is presumably a large stable of wives seems to be quite incongruent with the rest of the society we've seen. He is not behaving as other nobles do, just in a more extreme way. No, he is behaving in a way that is either long out of date or actually foreign to this world. Now, I'm not suggesting that he is literally from another world like Subaru, though I suppose it's possible. Certainly, pointing out that his name means Little King, a name that is Latin in origin, is another really incongruent thing to add to the series, and may support such a reading. At this point, I don't care if it's literally true, but I do care about the idea of his characterization being otherworldly. It's something we've talked about a lot these last couple weeks on stream or in Discord, but Regulus's idiosyncrasies remind a lot of us of behavior we associate with certain internet dweller stereotypes. I'm going to avoid naming specific communities here, but let me list out the qualities that stand out. One is his odd preoccupation with etiquette, if you can call it that. During his encounters with Kruge and Rem, with Juice and Fortuna, and with Subaru, he exhibits the same tendency. He gets very agitated at anything that strikes him as rude, and is likewise pacified when you follow the protocol he expects. He is far more upset at the idea of being interrupted than of being threatened with harm, as we see in his fights with Kruge and Fortuna. And conversely, when Subaru gives his own name as requested, he immediately softens. Odder still, Regulus does not seem to parse intent. The first time he and Subaru meet is when he bumps into Amelia and tries to touch her hair. Subaru intervenes and diffuses the situation with polite words spoken in an impolite tone. In fact, Amelia calls out his lack of sincerity right there in the scene, but Regulus is appeased all the same. It's as if he understands the form, but not the function. When you don't play his game and he gets worked up, though, he really starts to lean into histrionics. It's not enough to mention that he's been rudely interrupted or ignored. Instead, he piles on the grievances, talks about how the other person is violating his rights, and, in essence, goes on a tirade where he asserts what he sees as a moral high ground. That he does so while carrying out horrifyingly violent behavior is a rather deliberate contrast. He asserts that he is the victim while he victimizes. When Pandora, ostensibly his ally, tells him what to do, his response is to try to kill her purely because she had the nerve to do so. That is the value system of a psychopath. Someone who doesn't see others as people and feels no remorse at whatever hurt is inflicted. I like the way one of our members put this, and I'm going to paraphrase. Regulus speaks like someone arguing on a forum rather than someone having a conversation. The rapid escalation to grievances, the overemphasis on the specifics of the exchange rather than the ideas, the argumentative hyperbole, even the tendency to behave as though those weren't real people on the other end of what is being said. If you have spent any time at all in places where heated exchanges take place through the anonymity of the internet and the written word, then hopefully you understand the parallel that we are drawing here. There are other similarities as well. I don't speak Japanese myself, but we have a few gracious community members who contribute explanations of nuance or cultural context to aid our discussions. Though the examples are perhaps too few to insist on a pattern, it seems that Regulus speaks more like a character in a novel than a real person, like he adopts a literary style or reaches for slightly fancier words than necessary. Although this came up before we hit on the idea of him acting like a forum troll, it would mesh well with the idea. Certainly I've witnessed keyboard warriors who inject big words into their posts to try to inflate their perceived legitimacy. The way he tries to distance himself from Lie at the beginning of Season 2 might jive with this reading as well. He dismisses all that hunger and thirst nonsense, declaring himself above such petty indulgences. And, of course, there is the thing about virginity. Though neither universal nor exclusive to internet cultures, there are groups out there who likewise put great emphasis on a woman's virginity or purity as part of her value, in a way that is dehumanizing, and some have become rather infamous online. Regulus says it's the one thing that really matters. In isolation, maybe we don't condemn this quite as much, but combined with him calling 184 by a number rather than a name, and commending her for ceasing to smile, and of course for the whole unilaterally claiming Amelia as his bride, one among many, he's not collecting wives so much as dolls, not partners, but trophies. Regulus has some real nice guy energy, basically. He has a weird obsession with her purity without holding himself to any such standard, and claims love based purely on her looks, and gives nary a thought to her own agency, something that 184 confirms. It's like he's collecting 2D waifus rather than flesh and blood women. And, saying that, perhaps you see what I'm driving at. The Venn diagram of internet subcultures with these behaviors, and those who watch or read isekai, has, unfortunately, a bit of overlap. Since I believe that RE0 is at least occasionally holding a mirror up to the audience, Regulus strikes me as an unflattering incarnation of that side of the fanbase. This is what I meant earlier when I said that I cared about his characterization being otherworldly, even if he is not. However, we could also imagine that Regulus might be an illustration of what would really happen if such a fan got the isekai treatment, complete with whatever cheat power it is that Regulus possesses. A misogynistic misanthrope with enough power to style himself a king, complete with an extensive harem of pretty faces. Someone drunk on their own self-importance and insistent on their own set of values, regardless of the culture in which they find themselves? Well, let's pretend for a moment it has nothing to do with the audience. Like I said last week, there are some overlaps between Regulus and Subaru, especially early Subaru. Regulus, as a caricature of what Subaru could become, might be a sobering example in the same way as Roz in Season 2. Subaru referring to Emilia as his Yome, his waifu, seems like an especially bad look in that light. As to where it might take this parallel, I refer back to last Monday's mention that this season may examine the idea of knighthood and knightly behavior. Julius and Reinhard were the more obvious targets in the premiere, but Subaru is also a knight, and figuring out what exactly that means is potentially part of his character journey this time around. I said earlier that there doesn't seem to be much evidence for gender discrimination in Lugunica, with one glaring exception, and this is that exception. All of the knights are male. We rather specifically have 5 lady and knight pairs as our royal candidates. Traditionally, we might imagine this as 5 women and their 5 protectors, but that really isn't the case looking around. Julius and Anastasia both act as independent, capable people in the roles that suit each best. Kruj is the one who wades into battle in their pair, while Felis's superlative healing skill is something more often associated with female characters. As to Priscilla, well, Al isn't so much protecting her as he is protecting others from her. And while Reinhard is trying to act the chivalrous knight to his refined lady, Felt is having none of that action. So while Subaru might think he has to act in a certain protective way towards Emilia because of gender role preconceptions, the story universe doesn't seem like it would support him. He tried already this season to keep her from getting involved with Sirius, and she made plain her feelings on being sidelined. Of course, in classic RE0 style, this involvement is what gets her kidnapped, as the story refuses to explicitly endorse character decisions with one-to-one outcomes. Thus comes Regulus, who proceeds to act as a self-proclaimed protective husband, and seems to intend to place Emilia on the shelf for safekeeping alongside many others. He is following a script on male-female relations, where his role is as the authority and guardian, and hers is as the pretty face waiting at home. Even if Subaru is not thinking of Emilia in exactly those terms, I can imagine that noticing parallels between himself and Regulus might be quite the wake-up call. If the situation persists, perhaps even further eye-opening comparisons will arise. Now then, that is enough about Regulus's characterization. I said 2 possibilities occurred to me over this dissonant note of suddenly introducing the topic of Emilia's sexual experience. The other is our first good look at Capella Emirata Lugunica-chan-sama. Her entire shtick was a real highlight of this past episode for me. I mean, say whatever else you want about RE0, but man does it know how to give its villains a memorable introduction. Last week I said that unveiling the powers of Sirius and Liliana in the same episode naturally invites us to compare them. This week, I find a similar prompting to compare Regulus and Capella. Regulus had previously said that a pretty face is all that matters when it comes to love, and in this episode dwells on the importance of virginity. At the same time, he clearly depersonalizes his wives. Their physicality is what he values, not what lies within. Capella continues with that idea, but from a wildly different direction. She transforms the hostages into giant flies, a revolting mass meant to invoke a feeling of disgust. And once Subaru admits to that revulsion, she insists that such a response would be anathema to love, that whatever pretty way he tries to dress it up, his feelings are still dependent upon Emilia's physicality. Capella even assumes her form and mockingly supplies heartfelt phrases that she imagines Subaru might offer to illustrate his love, none of which have anything to do with Emilia's looks. I don't know if Capella actually believes that appearances should have nothing to do with love, or if she thinks they absolutely should and dislikes that anyone would pretend otherwise. It may be, then, that she and Regulus are actually in full agreement and simply show it in different ways. For surface reading, we might only apply Capella's accusation to Emilia's appearance. Subaru is certainly enchanted by her beauty and the fantasy of a half-elf with otherworldly eyes, and we know from peeking inside his room that girls with silver hair are right in his strike zone. But having this come up in conjunction with the focus on virginity, we might cast our scope wider to elements that are not strictly about who she is as a person. Would Subaru feel exactly the same if Emilia were not a virgin is the literal parallel, and probably not one he will need to face, but what about some other complication? Will he balk to learn that she's probably much, much older than he is, in terms of years since birth? Or balk to learn that she might be mentally younger, having gone into the ice as a young child and potentially had little time since awakening? What if she has her memories erased by gluttony, or is technically married to Regulus, or burned by Sirius, or, well, transformed into a fly by Coppola? Or what if she does end up having some link to Satala that dooms any chance of a normal relationship? Or, perhaps, what if she refuses to play the role that he expects? Capella, in essence, challenged the legitimacy of Subaru's love for Emilia, and it may be that she has something of a point. I'm not saying his affection for her is surface deep, but we also haven't had an instance where his image of her was really shaken either. Perhaps that is a future hurdle that the story has in store. Now, Capella's whole shtick certainly makes a point, and she certainly seems to enjoy making it, but considering her own morphing, monstrous body, I wonder if there's some part of her rant that originates in a past wound. Did someone reject her for the way she appears, fueling this spiteful mission to undermine the concept of love? Is she merely lashing out? Or is it possible she actually hopes to be wrong? I wonder about that last part because of a possibility we discussed. Capella has transformed all the hostages in the building with the broadcast media into flies, except for one, the dragon, which Kruge mistakenly attacked. Well, we also know exactly one person who was at this building, Rishia's husband, who I guess is Garf's stepdad? I'd at least consider it a coin toss's chance that the dragon is said husband. And considering the escape, I would wager he must still have some possession of his mental faculties. So, what happens if he remains in that form, or at least something that isn't strictly human, while being reunited with his wife? Would she reject him for his appearance, as Capella might expect, or be unbothered, thus challenging her assertion? I realize I am heaping a speculation on top of another speculation here, so might be wasting everyone's time, but I just can't help but remember that Rishia here had Frederica with one demi-human and Garfield with a different demi-human. I mean, girl's got a type. Being part dragon might even be an upgrade from her point of view. Of course, Kruge and Subaru have both been afflicted with Capella's blood as well. If it is indeed a curse in the same manner as the Mobbies cursed from Season 1, then, in theory, that means it can be stopped before it activates, but perhaps not afterwards. Either or both of them, then, may be the ones who are transformed, and the reaction to that what tests Capella's assertions. Subaru's situation might be even more complex, considering she added the blood to his open leg wound, and we learned that Felis used some kind of forbidden method to help heal him. Mixing medications can create unexpected side effects, so I don't see why the same wouldn't apply to magic that works on the body. Now, we may not worry about this too much right now, considering that Subaru might die and rewind the encounter and get back his leg, but this last episode really gave me the sense that the things we are seeing are going to stick, that the reset point is going to update pretty far along. Emilia's encounter with Regulus is a scene that I feel won't get replayed or skipped, as they introduce 184 and characterize Regulus rather sharply. And the scene of Kiritaka entrusting the city to Anastasia also seems like it had a note of finality to it, a passing of the torch and upping of the stakes. Neither of these scenes contain Subaru, nor is he aware they have transpired, and so he couldn't alter them on purpose anyway, and doing so accidentally wouldn't change what he knows either. They would just blip out, making them wasted scene space. In fact, I am suspicious that things in the city might get even more convoluted and desperate as this half of the season goes on, and we may end with Subaru dying and resetting almost right where he was, hitting him and us with the horror of realizing how many things will not be undone. Alright, that is the last main point I wanted to make for this week. We will continue discussion next time on both the new episode and the earlier events that I have not yet covered. I want to talk about Garfield and his mother and Mimi, both the original interactions and the character crisis that is ongoing. I wanted to expand even more about the Austria family drama, which may itself get a new wrinkle in the story ahead, considering that Wilhelm knows whoever this skilled cultist swordsman is. Former student or comrade? A daughter or other relative? Maybe Heinkel's wife? Or the most melodramatic possible answer, that it is somehow a still living Teresia. Not that I would bet my own money on that outcome. With any luck, we'll also get more expansion on the gluttony situation, as I totally understand sidelining that for a second to let Capella make a real splash with her introduction. And perhaps we'll have something to add to the oddity around Al and Priscilla, as we've had a lot of speculation in that direction. In fact, just in case it comes up next episode, we found ourselves wondering if the newly referenced Tome of Wisdom in the city might be in his possession, considering the little things he said that seem like hidden knowledge. Anyway, I know I spent a long time on the virginity question and everything that cascaded from it. I can imagine some of you thinking, Theta, something you need to talk out there, buddy? No, I just really felt I needed to emphasize the oddity of it and wonder at the possible implications. Because despite all the horror and violence and traumatizing scenes across 50+ episodes, there has never been even a hint of sexual violence or the threat thereof. Lots of stories use sexual assault as a kind of cheap way to make the audience hate a character or to inject tension into a scene, and RE0 has completely, conspicuously avoided doing so. And neither has there been any reference to sexuality or intercourse, and very little titillation or innuendo. It's a kind of shocking thing to reflect upon, right alongside the aforementioned absence of couples. And even though a forced marriage is a far cry from an actual assault scene, it opens up a whole family of topics that have been absent thus far. I guess we will see what that portends next time.